And welcome back to another video with me, JD. Stop laughing, MiniMonk, who's my special guest today, joining me for a round 11 emergency pod where we try and smile through the pain of what has been a very interesting team selection at the moment. Before we get into that, MiniMonk, thanks for joining. How are you, mate?
Yeah, not going too badly. Well, about as well as one can be after the chaos that we've just been dealt on a Thursday night.
Yes, and we're going to jump into that and kind of how it changes advice this week. Now, for those that haven't been blessed by the monk before, you've been missing out. He's one of our more active members in Discord and has first of all, sits on the coaches panel and does a lot of great work with them. But had top 100 results in fantasy and SuperCoach last year, I want to say it was.
Not quite top 100, 250th, I think, in SuperCoach last year, and second in Dream Team as well.
I'm sorry, we should cancel the pod then. Sorry, my bad. And then sitting in a very good spot this year as well. What are you ranked in fantasy at the moment?
Fantasy, I'm ranked 77th at the moment, and I'm currently 211th in SuperCoach as well.
So, yes, I mean, great track record and valued member of the Discord. And that's why he's jumping on tonight to help us figure out what our trades should be in the context of the injuries and all the other drama. And then, of course, coming into bye rounds as well. So I think what we'll do is start to cover off a few of the common situations, which is firstly, you've only got Oliver, but you don't have any of the other primos. Then we'll go through what happens if you've got a combination of two of these. And then we'll also, I guess, for those that are blessed, and honestly, I mean, you guys should just be jumping through fields. But if you've got none of them, then what are your options this week and what you should be doing? Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good plan.
All right. And where do you want to start? Which boat do you sit in?
I sit in the Oliver bucket. I've only got the one, but I think the Oliver bucket is much easier than the Josh Kelly bucket.
So I'm Oliver and Josh Kelly for SuperCoach and just Josh Kelly for fantasy. So I've got a little bit of a toe in each camp. Let's start off then with just the one then. So if you're only missing one this week, whether it be Oliver or Josh Kelly, what are you thinking about when it comes to trade options this week? Firstly, should people be trading? And then if so, who should they be targeting?
So I think it's important to differentiate AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach. I think in AFL Fantasy, it's a trade for both of them, no matter what. And I think you're probably trying to replace with a like for like, unless you've got one of them and Johannesson, which I think is a bit of a kettle of fish that we need to get to later on. But you want to be going for one of those premiums. And the obvious options this week is either Laird or Merritt in AFL Fantasy.
Yeah, great value options. Now, for those that, I mean, we're going to get into this a little bit, but say for whatever reason they're really stuffed for that buy and they can't go Laird or Merritt, would you, consider like a round 12 primo, so someone that's on bye next week?
Yes, but only if you're really sure. Like if you've got less than 5 premiums playing on that round 12 bye, that's when you can start to look to bring in someone like a Sinclair, a Steele, or a Brayshaw, or a Sarong. Those are probably the 4 that people are looking at to bring in on that week. But I think if you've been planning for your buys anyway, you've probably had Oliver or Kelly in mind, and most people are pretty stacked on the 15 buy anyway. So replacing a round 14 buy with a round 14 buy makes a lot of sense.
Okay. And would you look at anyone from the last buy as someone that's worthy of bringing in if for whatever reason you're one of the few that actually aren't stacked in that area?
As a top line premium, there's probably not a huge amount that you could look at. I think Butters is really expensive now in SuperCoach. In AFL Fantasy is probably still attainable, but you've got to look at how stacked you are. Again, Bailey Smith fits that bill. The other one, if you're looking for a bit of my boy, if you're looking for a bit more of a value option, and this is one that I'm actually really looking at in SuperCoach this week, Bailey Dale is really cheap and should have a pretty good role now with Johannesson out for quite a few weeks. Cornelio should have the role now that Kelly is out as well. So you're really looking to find where the holes that you can plug based on who's moved out and who you think can be either at the top of the line or presents value from here until their bye.
Just from a fantasy perspective, and then we'll swap maybe to SuperCoach options. Would you look at Doherty at all in that format?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah,
I think Doherty is one that would be a super unique. Definitely one that you could look at. Same with Walsh as well.
Yeah. Oh, actually, one other one for fantasy. So Anderson is the one that was the hotness a couple of weeks ago, just because of the goodbye. Are we off him as an option, even though he will play through, I guess, the 3 rounds we're going to struggle with the most?
Yeah, he's an option, but he's not one that I'd be going into with any confidence. If he starts to show something in the next 2 weeks, he's one you can actually pick up on round 14 as well.
Okay, so let's move over to the SuperCoach then side. You're trading out one of these guys. I mean, most commonly it's Oliver, and I think a lot of people are interested in moving him on just because the cash can actually let them do, get in a premium, then potentially another premium, kind of do an upgrade elsewhere. Are you in favor of trading Oliver this week?
I wasn't until we got dealt with what we had tonight. Because what I'm looking at is I'm looking at benches that are full of red dots, and I don't think that there was any coach that was running less than 3 red dots before tonight, and then it's just hit a wall again tonight. So freeing up that money from Oliver felt like a bit of a sugar hit, but now because there's no other ways for us to generate cash, we have to get creative. And so now I'm in favor of culling Oliver.
Okay, cool. So you speak about red dots, and I think a lot of people are in the same boat. So maybe to alleviate some of their concerns, we won't talk about your fantasy bench because it's actually like insane how green that looks. But SuperCoach, how many playing rookies do you have, or at least likely to play and not be a sub?
So currently I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 red dots in my team currently. I have Constable, Chincotta, Sharp, Madden, and Roberts. And that's with trading out a red dot this week. Actually, trading out 2 red dots. I'm trading out Oliver and Simpson.
Yeah, so I'm trading out 2 red dots as well, and I still have 2 more than you, which is Davey and Oliver. So my only playing bench rookie at the moment is Johnson, which is interesting from the SuperCoach perspective. I actually can't remember a year where it's been this bad. Generally, we're pretty good at managing rookies, and it just feels like it's been a shocking year in terms of getting some with decent job security throughout the year. And there's a whole bunch of others that we haven't even mentioned that got dropped this week. So Nevitt, Simpson, Baldwin, not that anyone would have jumped on him already. The other popular downgrade option this week in Fleeton's gone as well. I don't think we touched on Sharp as well. So, or no, we did, maybe we did. But anyway, so there's everyone's gone. And so I think that's why he's saying, if you've just got Oliver, get rid of him, get in someone that's cheaper, because basically everyone is, apart from Bont, and then use that money to upgrade elsewhere. And then we don't have to play around with any of these other rookies. You can get a red dot off field that way. So if you're trading Oliver down, who do you want to trade him down to? Is it Merritt and Laird, like in fantasy, or are there other options in SuperCoach that you direct people to?
I haven't actually looked too hard into the SuperCoach options. I kind of just went straight to Laird, because I think he's got the run, he's got the roll, he's got the runs on the board beforehand. And I think Merritt is the other main option as well. And again, like it was in fantasy, you're replacing round 14 buy with round 14 buy, which is a really nice move. But it's all about what you're doing in the combination of moves. So I got quite fortunate. I carried a lot of bank in from last week, which allows me to get that second upgrade quite easily. But if you aren't carrying that bank, you probably want to be looking somewhere around that 500K marker to be able to force that second upgrade as well. And that's where people are starting to get a bit more creative with someone like Jordan DeGoey.
Oh, wow. Yep. Okay.
Which is getting very interesting. I'm not sure it's somewhere where I would go. But, who else is there? Like on that 14 buy, we've got Adelaide, Hawthorn, Collingwood, Melbourne, Essendon, and West Coast, I think, missing. You're not really going to touch anyone from West Coast. If you're getting someone from Melbourne, it's probably Petrarca, which is someone that you could replace.
And I think the problem with Petrarca is he's the same price as Oliver, basically. Exactly. So even though he probably should be a good option with Clary out, given that we're talking about this being such a good move because you can kind of extract some value, Petrarca's just not the play for a lot of people, it feels like.
Exactly. And so then you're really stuck because you probably don't want to touch a Hawthorn mid. So maybe you could get tricky and do PP and get Sicily down back. Adelaide, the 2 options are obviously Laird and Dawson, but they're both on that 600K marker. And I prefer Laird of the 2 because he's that bit cheaper. And again, as I said with Collingwood, it's either Dacos, who, let's face it, most teams probably have already, or it's Jordan DeGoey at that cheaper price, but that's fraught with risk as well.
Yeah, I like holding off on Dawson. And look, with the amount of DPP we've got this year, it doesn't seem to matter as much. But I think flipping Sheasel to Dawson during that last buy is going to be the play for a lot of teams that don't have Dawson. Or like, flipping to Sicily if you don't have Sicily, just because it looks like a lot of us are really going to be struggling to get plays in that last round. And so being able to move off a rookie who may, kind of fall off in the back half of the year is kind of towards the top of the price. I think that's a really nice move. So yeah, for SuperCoach and just for transparency, your trades are...
I'm currently doing Simpson and Oliver. I'm going to Laird, and I'm actually going to Bailey Dale.
Okay, wow. Yeah, you're going chips in on Bailey Dale, which is really cool. I haven't looked at... Well, I have looked at it, but who did the Dogs bring in?
Let me
no one.
quickly.
So their sub from last week was McNeil, and I think he's just playing in the 22, and then JJ's been dropped. Okay, interesting. Yep, I mean, I definitely like it. We saw both Dale and Richard score much better last year without JJ in the side. Have you got any concern that they actually move Caleb Daniel behind the ball again?
I do have concerns, but I think that happens when Treloar comes back into the team, and I don't actually know who moves out, because it could be that Caleb Daniel moves down back, or it could actually be that Bailey Smith is the one who gets moved out of the CBA rotation, because they are both the ones that have been moved out when they've had their full midfield contingent. So the worst case scenario with someone like Bailey Dale is that I hold him up until that round 15 buy, and then I flip him then, and hopefully he makes 80 or 90K in this time period, because his break even's so low and he's got those high scores in his rolling average. But best case scenario, he could be a keeper at D6 with JJ out for 8 to 10 weeks.
All right, cool. So let's transition then to the what happens if you've got Oliver and Josh Kelly, which is, or like them and JJ, which is my case in SuperCoach. And given we're talking about SuperCoach, let's go there, and then we'll cross back to fantasy. So what should I be doing? MiniMonk, tell me.
I think you've got to hold Oliver. You got to hold the one that's... you've got to hold the one that's more likely to be the top 8 midfielder. And Oliver's not even in the conversation for not being a top 8 midfielder. He's likely a top 3, if not the top midfielder for the rest of the year. And look, we don't know the severity of the injury. He could be back next week. He could be back in 2 weeks' time. Don't know. Whereas Kelly, the club's come out and said it's a 4-week injury. And he also has the history of soft tissue. And he has the round 15 bye, which is the worst
of the two.
Yes, exactly. So Kelly is the one that you flip. The problem is that Kelly is worth nowhere near as much as Oliver, and that makes it much more difficult.
I think a little. I mean, it's true. You can sideways swap him though to basically any other top dog. So you've got Laird only 6K more. You still make a little bit of money going to Merit, and I think those are the kind of popular options that we've talked about this week. If you needed to swap him in by, I think it becomes a little bit more tricky for who are the other options. But once again, I feel like this is a minority of people that would be looking to do that. And I think you're right. So just on holding Oliver, I'm still optimistic that he comes back after next week, and so we actually get one game out of him before he goes on bye. But it's in the round that we don't really need people. And look, it's unfortunate having to hold him, because it's definitely leaking points, right? Like having 660K sit on your bench for 3 weeks is not ideal in any given year. But I think the positive for me is at least 2 of those are buy rounds. One of them is a very easy buy round. The other one, at least it looks like I can cover for now. And then he's back for the buy round that I'm going to struggle with the most. And so, yeah, it sucks, but maybe having Oliver as a pod over the back end of the year, because the reality is most people that are trading are getting very low on trades anyway. The likelihood they can bring Oliver back is going to be near zero unless someone like a Bont gets injured at some point, then they decide to swap there. So, look, it could work out for me, but it then does come to the question of, okay, so you've got 2 of these guys, you're trading Josh Kelly, you're keeping Oliver. What do you do with the other trade then? And there are no downgrade options this week. So for me, it really looks like there's only 3 options, and one of them I hate, but we'll go through them. So the first is you downgrade to a rookie that's only played 1 game. So we're talking about Wardlaw, we're talking about Ford. Or you could kind of side swap one of your rookies or mid prices that's a red dot into someone that's playing. And this would be where you're looking at someone like a Cincotta out to a Humphrey or a Weddle or a Atkins if you've got the money to do so. Or you could just do nothing. So break it down to me, because the first two of those options feel like complete SuperCoach no-nos. Like they go against the ethos of trading and the traditional rules we kind of follow by. But we're not in a traditional situation anymore. And then holding steel does feel like that is the one that we'd point to normally as the right move. But when I'm looking at these buys and I'm going, look, I've only got 16, 15 or whatever it is playing, maybe even less in those final rounds, it feels like trading into a bad rookie that is going to play is actually much more important than sitting still this week. So yeah, weigh up your thought process and kind of counsel me on what I should be doing with this second trade if I'm sitting in this situation.
It's so tricky. As you said, trading into a rookie that's only played one game is a big no-no. We've already seen that be a massive consequence already this year. We had it with Wagner and we've had it with Drury already. We had Sharp, who played 2. He's got his 3rd and now he's been dropped as well. And the 2 that you're talking about are, Ford and Warlord. They both play for North Melbourne, who you'd hope they're blooding the kids, but has anyone looked at what Ford's done in the past in SuperCoach scoring?
It's not good. It's
not good at all. He got 100 odd on the weekend, but there's every chance that his next 2 games he goes 20-20 and he could be dropped. Wardlaw is a little bit more appealing, but the problem with trading into Wardlaw this week is if you need to do a downgrade next week, who are you trading into that week? Are you going early on a rookie again? Are you going early on Mullen? Are you going early on McAndrew and playing and hoping that he plays in round 13? That's the tricky part. This is why I feel a little bit more comfortable trading into the likes of Humphrey and Atkins, because I actually view these players as being players you probably want to hold through until actually round 16 at least. And Gold Coast dropped Ellis this week and kept Atkins in the team.
Which is, we need to get into this, because I'd been kind of leaning towards Humphrey check over Atkins all week. But I'm now starting to go like, Atkins is mature age. He's got the role. He's got the scoring history. Yes, his break even isn't as good. Yes, he's a little bit more expensive. But is he the better option over Humphrey?
Potentially he is. I think it's a really tricky one. And again, it's about where you're needing to bolster your stocks, because if you're needing,
I just need players. Give me players and points. I'll take anyone.
It was only 3 weeks ago that Humphrey got a -3. It wasn't great, but
no,
I think he's probably got more job security than Atkins does, even with Ellis dropped and Atkins holding in the team. So I'd probably be leaning towards Humphrey if you had to pick from the 2. I do have Atkins, so I'm pretty happy there, but I'm not going to be trading into Humphrey this week because, again, it's so team dependent when you're giving advice like this.
Yes, yep.
But I think if you're looking to trade into one of them, I don't think that that's a bad idea. Like we looked at it last week. You looked at trading into these sorts of players. They had a low break even. He had a tough matchup. He still scored well. Who's to say he can't do it again in the next couple of weeks? He keeps going at 80 through to the end of the buy. He reaches 400k at round 16. You flip him then. Feels like a pretty good win.
There's so many ifs you've got to stack. Like
I know.
So for transparency, this is where my SuperCoach trades come in. So far I've gone Josh Kelly out to Laird, and then I had Bank. So I'm looking at trading a red dot out to Humphrey or Atkins. And who have I got it at the moment? Cowan. So I'm getting Cowan out. Finally, I think Cincotta's probably got a slightly better chance of playing again at some point, even though he's not in the emergencies this week, which we'll get into some other time. But and then it's Humphrey or Atkins. And I the way I kind of see it is like this Humphrey pick, I'm happy to bet against every other week of every other year that this doesn't work out from this point. Like it just never works. But I'm going like, sorry, it just feels awful to trade into because I know there's a whole bunch of teams that have him and I don't, and I could like make up ground on those teams, but there's no other better options this week. I just don't think there is one. So it's either Atkins or Humphrey for me. Have to get the red dot off, have to get someone that plays through the buys. I'm not going to make enough money for this trade to be a success. But if I get 3 weeks of him scoring 65, I'm probably pretty like content with that. It's not ideal, but yeah. And I think you're right. I have Atkins probably scoring more per week from here over the buys, but I do think there's a chance that he doesn't play the last buy round. Like it's only 10, 15, 20% chance, but I think there's a chance that's the case. And I think it's like only if Humphrey breaks down, he's not playing that last, or gets suspended or something ridiculous like that. So with that in mind, I just feel like I have to pick Humphrey for the job security, even though the scoring's worse. But
for transparency's sake, I will release this much of my AFL fantasy trades. I'm trading into Humphrey in AFL fantasy this week.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we have had a little bit of chat about that in the Discord this week. I thought that was on the cuts. I don't hate it. Don't hate it. I mean, it's a little bit different in the format as well. Just given the 5-week rolling average, you're going to get those
exactly
ton equivalents for a little bit longer. So there's not as much chance he drops cash by the end of the buy rounds. Where SuperCoach, a little bit different. There's a chance he peaks and comes back down by the time we want to move him back on. So let's talk about fantasy then. If you've got two of these dogs, you've got Oliver and Kelly, or you've got JJ, who's kind of like a cashed up mid-pricer now, and one of these guys. What are you doing this week? Because I'm still new to the fantasy game, second year, but everything that I've read is like as soon as these guys are out more than 2 weeks and they cost that much, you just have to sideways them. You can't hold on to them. It just never works. So is there any situations where people should be considering holding, or is it just trade, bang, bang?
I think the only way you can consider holding is if you can get a look at a couple of rookies on Friday night or on Saturday morning and they pop a 80 score. And the only one I'd hold out of
that. That's so funny because the only person with a bench is you. All right. Like there's no one that's able to do that.
You're just praying like someone's got, a Johnson on their bench, or I don't know who else is playing early.
JVR might be like
a JVR pops a score, or a Weddle pops a score, and you can take that. But if it's Kelly, like 4 weeks, Kelly's got to go, and it's either this week or next week, and you might as well just get it out of the way this week and get onto the premium before they go up in price. Because, as we've talked about before, Laird and Merritt are probably the two main targets. They've both got break-evens that are relatively low. Well, I think Merritt's is 90 and I think Laird's is 102. So they're going to go up in price this week, most likely. And they've got great matchups and great runs. So if you've got both Kelly and Oliver, I would be flipping almost easily just straight to those two mids. I'd just go straight to Merritt and straight to Laird. The trickier situations if you've got JJ as well.
Yeah. So just quickly, one thing we didn't mention about Merritt is people worried about the O'Neill tag, which he's kind of done the last couple of weeks, holding Merritt back. He's been dropped from the side. So Merritt not only seems like a slam dunk option, which I think he already was, but now back in conversations for vice captain, which we'll talk about towards the end, given that originally we were worried about, do we have loopholes? Now it feels like there's no shortage. So on JJ then, if you've got JJ as your second in the mix, what should you be looking at with him? What can you do? And I'm going to preempt what you're thinking. Bailey Dale? Bailey Dale? Is that where we're going?
Bailey Dale is one to consider. There's obviously a few others that you consider around that price point. Atkins is still attainable. You make cash going to him. Could be a play. The other one with the amount of DPP we have, because I'm assuming that most people have at least one of Sheasel and Jack Zeeble, you can probably DPP them back, is Ben Hobbs. He's still there. He's still not that expensive. He's got the low break and he's got the run for the next 3 weeks, but just make sure that you're able to trade him out at the round 15 buy.
Yeah, he's only 6K more expensive than Atkins. And yeah, originally before the Kelly news, Hobbs was going to be one of my trade-in targets this week. And then I was still going to find a way to force him in until teams dropped. And then I realized I have to do other stuff. So I really like Hobbs as an option this week. Shields back, which I think does probably hurt him a little bit, but I think that's well and truly offset by Essendon's run of North and West Coast. Well, West Coast and North in the next couple of weeks. So I think he's a pretty nice one to run into. Yeah.
And there's still concerns that Shield could be a late out as well. I know the club's obviously named him, but they did that last week as well. And I think he got sent for scans the other day.
He did, yeah. He had a training mishap. So last week he had a calf cork, which had like a little bit of a bleed, and he could have got up, but it just wasn't 100%. So they decided, you know what, rest. And then his foot flared up, which was the original injury I think he had earlier in the year, and a very old prior injury. So he's clearly had a couple of problems in that area. So I wouldn't be surprised if you're right. Like, they give him a chance to get up. But if he doesn't get up, he's a laid out. And I can see, there's a couple of players in like D'Ambrosio and Davey that could come into the side, which is really good from Hobbs' perspective because they're not mids. So that means they're coming in. Hobbs is probably getting more of that CVA time like we saw this week. But I think regardless of that, even with the role he was playing, like half forward and pushing up to the ball, I think he can still score well just given the opposition and the fact that, the likes of Parrish and Setterfield are still out of that side who were taking up points previously.
He was playing a very Walsh-like role, coming off of the half-forward flank and basically being the first one into that stoppage and playing pressure. And he was always around the ball when it was moving around the ground. So even though his CBA numbers, I think, was 9 out of 20-odd, he was still near the ball most of the game.
Yeah, that's right. He was playing as an on-baller. He just wasn't necessarily at CBAs. Yep. And I think the other thing that was really nice is like some of his tackling and defensive work was just really good. I think Caldwell actually stood up and did that too. Now, like for transparency on fantasy, which I'm not asking for you because you're a little bit closer to the pointy end. I'm like struggling around the 400 mark at the moment. So I've got Kelly out for Laird in, but of course I already have Merritt, and same with Supercoach. I already got Merritt, which is why I'm targeting Laird. If I didn't have either, I'd probably still go Laird just because like I'm anti my own team. And then I'm going Cowan out and getting Wardlaw in. And this is obviously the big difference between fantasy and Supercoach this week is that you do go on some of these one gamers rather than waiting the second week. So is it full steam ahead for Wardlaw if you can't get up to a Atkins, Humphrey, Hobbs type?
I think the other one that needs to be in the conversation is Weddle as well. I think he's someone that you can probably trade into with a little bit of confidence, but I think this is the same conversation we were having with Supercoach before, is that if you bring in Wardlaw this week, who are you bringing in next week? There is not many rookie downgrade options that exist. We might have one now with Ocean Mullen.
Yeah.
But like, aside from him, we're banking on, Faye and Fleeton coming in, and they're both disappear, even though GWS have had 3 injuries to their defenders. So I think you've got to be really careful about, if you bring him in, what you're doing next week as well, because this is where coach is going to get really tripped up.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because it's not like Wardlaw is cheap, right? And he's going to have a reasonable price rise next week. And I guess the other thing I wonder is like, how many 400k guys can you bring in? Because if you're paying, well, I mean, Atkins is 550, same with Hobbs. Then you've got Humphrey, who's 420, and then Weddle's about 395. So it's about 400 as well. So I kind of like, well, what are teams doing next week that allow them to kind of go one up, one down when you've had to go down to a 400k guy multiple weeks in a row? Maybe they can, but that's the only thing I worry about with like not jumping on some of these guys while they're a little bit cheaper. It's just tricky because we just don't have that blooding, and maybe we get that in 2 weeks' time after the mid-season draft. There's a few players that are getting murmurs about, and they'll get picked up and hopefully feature relatively soon. But that's 2 weeks' time. That's not next week. And it's really hard to trade into 200k players off there or coming into the buys themselves, because if they're around 15 buy, 200k player, even if they're a 200k player not on the round 15 buy, are they going to be there by the end of the buys when you probably need their score the most? Yeah. I mean, that's where I'm like, Ocean Mullen, can you please look like Gary Ablett Jr.?
Exactly.
Perfect buy as well. We need to be blessed with something like this. All right, so let's quickly then talk about the magical third scenario, which, I mean, I don't even think they're watching this type of video. They're probably just laughing themselves to sleep tonight. But let's assume that you've avoided all of the carnage. You don't have any of these big dog primos out. And your biggest gripe is that you can't downgrade to someone this week. I mean, in Supercoach, that's true. In fantasy, it's not. What advice would you be giving to these guys? Because just having a think about it, and it's a question I haven't been asked much this week. For me, this feels like you have a really good chance to start fixing up your bench and getting extra players on during the buys that other people won't get the opportunity to do. Is that what you'd be prioritizing? Would you still be trying to do like a normal upgrade? Where's your head at when it comes to this stuff?
Try and take as much of the advantage that you have at this point and use that to kind of further it. Most people are going to be floundering around with having to trade premiums this week and have to neglect their bench. And So everyone's going to be kind of in the same boat with a number of premiums. So don't try and force the premium upgrade and trade into a rookie that, isn't there or isn't going to be staying in the team, isn't going to generate the cash that you need them to, or isn't going to be the field. Fix the bench. Use this as the opportunity to target those players like Atkins and Humphrey if you can, or if there's another 200 odd K player that you like, fix those red dots, because it could be the difference between a 60 on field and a donut. Like we're looking that dire when it's coming towards the end of the buys, and that helps because not only are you restarting your cash generation by fixing these rookies, you're also getting the points on field, and it's going to pay off much more in the long run than forcing the upgrade and maybe getting 50 extra points this week.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I'm not sure what typically you do with fantasy at this point in year, but it feels like the perfect type around we're getting in someone like a Humphrey, like yourself was doing, or a Hobbs. Like these look like the perfect types this week where you're going to get job security during the buys, you're going to get points, you're going to get cash gen, and it feels like it may not seem like you're pressing your advantage much this week, but you'll get a huge boost off it over the next month.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the trades that you make in these fantasy competitions, you sometimes get that instant payoff. Like last week, if you bought in Merit, then great, you got 150 odd in SuperCoach, you got 150 odd in AFL Fantasy. But a lot of these smaller moves, they take 4 or 5 weeks to pay off, and people don't see the dividends of them at the time, but they make the world of difference. Like you might say that my bench this week in AFL Fantasy looks really good this week. That's because I've spent the last 2 weeks of trades before this week fixing it. And this is where it pays back, because people neglect it. Like there were people running 3 or 4 red dots. I know that it's very common to run it in SuperCoach and Dream Team as well, because these players haven't generated the cash. You just have to sit with that. Like players like Johnson and Roberts and Charlie Constable, they're just not moving in price. So you can't afford to trade them. It's a waste of a trade. Exactly. So when you've got the chance to do that, if you don't have any injuries to your premiums, you don't have any mid prices, and you've got someone that's like ready to be cashed in, say for example, someone like Sam Simpson or Hollins, these are really good guys that you could cash in this week if you want to. Moving them to another player who's on the way up and going to generate good points, good cash. By the end of the buys, it could be the difference between, it could be 200 points of difference plus the cash generation you get as well.
Okay, this is all really good. So I think this is really useful. There's 2 more things I wanted to cover. First, we've got some quick Q&A from the Discord. It's pretty heavily SuperCoach focused, not going to lie, even though I asked for both sides of the fence. And then we'll do some vice captain talk quickly as well, just given that it does look like teams have changed that a little bit, both because we've got more loopholes and then obviously O'Neill's not around either. Where do you want to start?
Let's do some vice captaincy. All right,
SuperCoach or fantasy? Let's pick a format.
I think they're pretty similar in terms of who you're looking at this week.
Oh, so. Okay. I always find like in fantasy, the first thing I look at is Toronto, and I haven't really seen SuperCoach one, so I think they're quite different. But all right, who do you like the look of this week? Who are you mucking around with?
I think if we go game by game, Friday night, Goulden. I think most people were looking at him, but I think now that we've got more vice captaincy options later on in the round, I'd kind of be fading him and starting to look towards the Saturday morning games. I think Sicily against St Kilda should be a great matchup. I think also Steele against Hawthorn should be a great matchup if you're looking to VC someone from that. And either the Freo boys, Brayshaw and Sarong, could be good matchups into Melbourne, and the same with Petrarca as well.
Are you concerned at all with the Sarong ankle talk?
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you're a Sarong owner in fantasy, right? So you've got you have to be confident. Yeah, you have to believe everything will be fine. Yes. And I just keep hoping that the trolley lady on the flight keeps bumping the card into his leg on the way over.
He's probably got the window seat.
Probably. He's probably been put up into business class. He's got his feet up. Damn it. They're probably massaging it. All right. So yeah. All right. And then after that, we've got Geelong GWS.
Probably wouldn't touch anyone in that game. Let's move on.
Really? I love Green as an option.
You like Green as an option? Interesting.
Who's Cat Scott as the midfield? There's no one left. Holmes is gone.
True.
Nevitt's out this week. There's no Dangerfield. Selwood's retired for at least half a year now. Maybe he come back in mid-season draft. I'm looking at who they've got named there, right? They've got Guthrie on a wing, which is a bit of a laugh, hopefully. Atkins, and then Isaac Smith. And then off on following. They've got Blitzav and Bruin. So unless a Blitz goes to Tom Green, like he's gonna feast.
The biggest thing I've got concerns about is that everyone's looking at the matchup last week where Brayshaw and Sarong went wild. But do we not think that that's an outlier rather than the norm?
I mean, but like Brayshaw and Sarong are different kettle of fish as well to most mids that they face. And Geelong has been historically hard this year. I'd totally take that on face value.
That's kind of why I'm a bit more hesitant to go that way. I understand the logic with someone like Green, and it's probably a VC shout, but I think that most teams probably have a better option this week. But if you're thinking about it, it's not a bad option.
Okay, all right. So so after that, anyone else that you like the look of?
Gold Coast Dogs, bit tricky, going to be very wet. You could consider English as a very late VC, but I wouldn't have any confidence going into him with a C.
So that's
is normally
that's TIO Stadium, which is Northern Territory. So expect dewy, kind of unpleasant games. Is it meant to be raining there as well?
I have no idea, but I remember the last time there was a game up that way, there was something like 80 ruck contests in the game, which is always useful for someone like English. And he gets around the ground really well. He can probably get around the ground and run Wits around, but Wits can be a bit restrictive. But I think the bigger one that people are looking at on that night is that Essendon matchup into West Coast. And I think that you mentioned it before with O'Neill out, Merritt could get off the chain 2 weeks in a row. I mean, you only had to see what he did last week to Richmond, who were probably arguably a much better midfield than what the West Coast are going to be rolling out this week. I think if you've got Merritt, you need to be running either the VC or the C on him this week.
Awesome. Okay, that'll be music to people's ears, especially those that are looking to trade him in. And then we jump into the Sunday game. So we've got Richmond and Port. So I kind of mentioned Taranto has been a pretty good option in fantasy this year, but Port's been on the restrictive side. Any consideration for him?
Not particularly. I try to play the matchup as well as the form that a player is in. And yes, Taranto's tonned in every single game, but Port are restrictive as anything. I think you just mentioned it. I'm just looking at the DVPs at the moment. Where are they? Yeah, they're not the most restrictive this year, but they're in that category. And so I don't probably want to go there myself. Yeah, last 10, they're the most restrictive. So I'm not going to be going there with Taranto.
Flip side, for those that are living in the land of Butters, or potentially even Rosie, do you like that? I mean, we saw Merritt put up a 160 in SuperCoach and a 150 in fantasy on them. So are we thinking that's a bit of a smash matchup?
Yes. So Richmond is a very, very friendly matchup for midfielders to score well against. And if you're wanting to make up ground on players and wanting to go someone that's a bit more unique, Butters and Rosie. Like, especially Butters. Butters is in phenomenal form the last 3 weeks.
Yep. Do you believe in the coach swap bounce back? And Richmond will actually be hyper competitive because
I think it's more about who they've got missing in that team, and I just think that kind of similar to West Coast, the team is probably on the wrong side of the age curve, and they might need to be forcing a rebuild. And if that's the case, then the coach is only going to start to try and implement that as well. So the coach bounce back could happen, but I don't see it.
All right, then let's bring it home. So any captain options in either Collingwood versus North or Adelaide versus Brisbane?
Collingwood versus North Melbourne is very interesting if you're wanting to look at someone like Sheasel or Zeeble, but I probably wouldn't go there. And again, from the Collingwood side, there's no one that I'd really go to except for Dacos. And again, it feels very risky with his form over the last few weeks. But in Adelaide versus Brisbane, you've got a couple of really good fullback captaincy options, I think, in Laird and Dunkley. Both are in really good form at the moment. The matchup is relatively neutral for both. And, most people have Dunkley and quite a lot have Laird as well. So I think those two are a good couple of fullback options if you're wanting a captain in the last game.
Are you worried that they'll rest Laird at all if the game's a blowout either way?
Potentially, but you could say that about so many different players. You could say that about Marshall. I mean, we've already seen the propensity for him to be rested. We've seen it from Laird as well.
Steele,
you just don't know.
Same boat.
Yeah, Steele as well. Like it's something to consider, but it's really hard to factor it in.
Okay, so let's try and rank some of these, or talk about some stacks that you really like, because I hear lots of good options, but for me, the Sunday ones that all seem to have really high ceilings but potentially low floors, and that's where like Butters and Rosie fit in that camp for me. Dacos fits in that camp, I think, a little bit as well. Laird, I kind of have a little bit of a similar concern just with the rest. Dawson has been quite peaky in trophy. So, and then some of like the like I don't know. So what are you looking at? What do you like? What is actually a VCC that you'd be keen on this week?
Yeah, so I'm as I said before, I think Gordon was my VC up until team kind of shit. I'm looking at the likes of Steele, as you've mentioned before, Green, Brayshaw Sarong, Petrarca as VC options, and then I'm just rocking into Merit C, I think.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. For me at the moment in SuperCoach, I've got Petrarca into Merit. I think if I'm going to hold Oliver and be one of the few with Petrarca, let's try and ride a bit of Delta coverage for me. Oh, yeah. And then I think Merritt might be the captain option with Noah Neal, which feels like a trap. Like this is the typical type of thing where it's like, oh, none of us were going to see him, and then something silly happens at teams, we all see him, we get burnt for it. But that's where I'm going. Play the odds, and then on the fantasy side, I'm looking at either like Green into Merritt or Merritt into Dacos. I think Dacos is a little bit safer with his floor in that format, even though I know that hasn't always been the case. So. Yeah, I think that's where I'm looking at the moment for vice captain.
Yeah, I think I'm looking a bit similarly. I'm the curse of having a good bench in AFL fantasy is I don't have that many options to loophole with, and my best option
I feel so bad.
My best option is probably Heath, and he plays on the Saturday, so I probably have to vice captain Goulden on the Friday night, and hope that he takes something that I can take. Otherwise, looking to fall back on one of my trade-in targets, I think.
If you're one of the few that have Doherty, I actually don't mind that.
I don't have Doherty.
Yeah, no, I know you don't, but I'm saying for those, we haven't mentioned him, but that is the Friday night.
Oh, yes.
Actually, that's probably my preferred of anyone in that game.
Even Walsh as well, I think, is a decent VC shout.
Yeah, I just worry about the SCG ground. It can be like lead to some funny scoring. All right, let's finish it off with some few questions here. I think we've answered some, but I'll try and pick through some of the rest. So the first one, which is definitely more of a SuperCoach question, obviously fantasy in a second, but how many trades should you have for injuries when your team is complete? Have you got a number in mind?
It's so dependent on how your team looks and what everything else has happened. I think if you're coming out of the buys with more than 4, you're probably in okay shape. I think 5 or 6 would be the nice number if you could get to that many. But it's normally about 1 trade for every 2 weeks that's left in the season.
Yeah, I think it's about 1 for every 2 to 3 weeks. And then depending on how much carnage you get in the year, that either is enough or like it's well short. And unfortunately, like every spare trade you have in the bank was wasted points from earlier in the year. And if you run out and you're carrying donuts or playing rookies, then you know it's really hard to time that stuff perfectly. But I'd plan for like, one trade for every 2 weeks left is like absolutely amazing. So if we come out at round 16, there's 7 rounds left. You've got 4. Am I doing the math right there?
4.
8 rounds, 4 trades. 4. That's probably a pretty good spot, assuming your team's fully upgraded. If it's 1 less and you've got 3, it's okay, but you're playing with fire a little bit, and you might have to hold like 1 or even 2 weekers, depending on what happens towards the end there. And you're also getting to the spot where if anyone underperforms, you can't trade, or if they're carrying an injury, you can't really trade, and that becomes tricky.
It's also worth mentioning, like, what's the health of your bench at that point? Like, if you've got players like Humphrey, Weddle, Mitchell left on your bench when you've got a fully completed team and 4 trades left, you're a lot more comfortable than someone that's got a bench that's basically dead. Yeah, exactly. And, if it was like 4 trades or it's 3, but you've got Darcy Cameron as your F7, cover, R3 cover, then like, obviously you'd rather be in that situation. So like, Let's be real. If you get cover at this point in the year, if you've got a premium that's able to cover a couple of lines, you should be in the top 100 this year. Because I'm seeing teams struggle to get to 22 premiums.
I think the teams that will do that are the ones that have been more conservative at the start of the year. So they've probably maxed out on cash a little bit more, but they're well behind on points. So like that might be their opportunity to catch up, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, rookie carnage make any difference on your thought process for Clary? I don't think so. I think the two options that we talked about, which is like trade or hold, were kind of the same options earlier in the week. And just, if you're planning to downgrade to Fleeton and now you can't, it kind of forces your hand a little bit, but it doesn't really change it too much.
I think it did for me. I think it did for me. Yeah, I was in the Clary hold camp, and I was originally actually just one trading up to Bailey Dale from Hollands, but because Hollands is a green dot and because I've got a couple more red dots on my bench now, I'm kind of just doing the kill two birds with one stone and using a red dot rather than using a green dot to get to Dale and also getting layered in the process.
Green dot's a bit rich given the way Vossi's been playing with him. Maybe they should colour that in half. Not a salty Hollands owner in fantasy whatsoever. That has to keep fielding him. Yeah. All right. So we mentioned both these, but Dale or Doc for SuperCoach this week?
If you can afford Doherty, I'd go to Doherty.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in fantasy, it's a very different proposition where the price difference is like 300K, but in SuperCoach, I think it's more like 80K, and Doherty's the one that's got the proven history as a top scorer. So that's probably where I'd go. Say you have 6 injury trades, but 3 donuts in round 15. So I assume the team's fully upgraded, but we've hit round 15 and they currently got 3 donuts on field, but they have 6 trades left for the rest of the year. How many of those trades would you use in round 15? So you could use 3 and go down to 3 trades, but then get all the points on field, or you could, use 2 or
It really depends about what you can do with those trades as well. Like if you can use those 2, if you could use 2 of those 3 trades and get to 2 players that are going to score 100 that week or should score 100 that week, then I'd 100% use 2. If you can get 3 trades, but the third one's only getting you a player that scores 50, I'd probably hold that third trade. But yeah, I think it's something that you have to assess when you get to that round.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like once you start getting down to that last situation, the math becomes a little bit easier because towards the end of the year, right? Like if you miss someone for a week and you can't cover them and you can't trade them, and it's a primo, it's 90 to 120 points each week. And exactly. So if it's 2 weeks, it's 240, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the value of a trade becomes much more than 50 points. But I think if you're getting better premiums or whatever it is around that point, you're sidewaysing a Sheasel to a Dawson, for example, then it's absolutely worth doing it because you might actually be getting a better premium in the process of that as well. So, I think you're spot on. I probably wouldn't be fiddling around with rookies at that point, just for a 50 or a 60, but I would be doing it for a primo. Maybe the only exception to that is if the rookie you're getting is going to be really good cover for the rest of the year. So if say you're getting someone like Sardis for Essendon who debuts at that point, like you're getting rid of Sincotta for him or something, and that gets you a 70 or 80 that week, and then you've got cover in your midfield and you don't otherwise have cover, then maybe that's the type of thing we'd consider. But this is getting very niche and specific for a whole bunch of situations that we haven't seen yet. All right, so one player we haven't covered this week, but I think he is a good option in both formats, is Sicily. And the question we've got is Sicily versus Laird. Now, they asked specifically for SuperCoach, but let's draw it out for fantasy as well, just so we can touch on him.
I think have a look at your round 14 defenders is the first thing I would say. Most people are running Dawson and Dacos, or at least another round 14 defender. Yes, you can tuck Dawson away. You've got that DPP link, but most people don't have that many round 14 midfielders anymore, especially with Oliver getting injured. I think that Merritt and Petrarca are probably the 2 most popular ones aside from Laird. So I'd probably be leaning towards Laird because he has the ability to go for a run of 120 or 130 in SuperCoach and take a season away from you if you don't own him. Whereas Sicily is a lot more prone to fluctuation, and you can probably pick him up at some point. Like I think you've mentioned before, flipping Sheasel to Sicily at round 15 makes a lot of sense in formats. And in AFL fantasy, you're probably flipping and choosing between premium defenders at a later point anyway, so you'll be able to pick up Sicily when it gets to a bit of a cheaper price.
Yeah, I think this is just one of those really hard ones because you look at in SuperCoach anyway, Sicily's break even of 55, and you're like, damn, it's now or never. I'm going to have to pay so much more. And the matchup this week's pretty good with the Saints as well. And so I can see that drawing a lot of people into leaning that way. But I think you're spot on. Like I'm looking at my fantasy side at the moment and where it's got Dawson, Sicily, Day, and Dacos. And I'm like, that buy is an absolute car crash now. And in SuperCoach, it's just Dacos and Day. So I'm missing Sicily, missing Dawson. And I'm like, I don't really want to put Sicily back there. I kind of want to save the pain of that, especially given the dead benches. So I'm probably more in favor of Laird. And I think like in both formats, like the price gap isn't enough that it makes it worthwhile. So Laird's 40K cheaper in SuperCoach and about 100K cheaper in fantasy, I want to say. And I just think that Laird is that, potential to be the top 2 or 3 scorer in the whole game from here to the end. And given the price difference, I'd just rather take the bet on him.
And I'd feel so much more comfortable captaining Laird than I would captaining Sicily. I would not want to be ever captaining Sicily. Whereas Laird, most weeks you're pretty comfortable putting a VC or C on him, even if the matchup isn't fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like probably the wrong way to think about it, just because the other one you can get post their bye, but Laird post bye, once he's rested up, I don't think we're going to see him getting sat in the fourth quarter of games anymore. And then it becomes a really strong option. He's already been averaging tons in his last 5 getting rested or playing 3 quarters. So yeah, I'm on board with Laird. All right, what to do with Oliver? I think that's one that we've covered pretty well. Go early on Wardlaw or trade Clary. I think we'd both say trade Clary over going early on Wardlaw, and that sounds like exactly what you're doing in SuperCoach. In SuperCoach, how many trades is enough to luxury upgrade someone after your team is finished? So I think we touched on that. If you've kind of got more than 4 trades post buys, then you could look at doing it, depending on what the quality of the upgrade is.
I also just be careful using the word luxury upgrade as well, because if you're trading out someone like, I guess, Sheasel or Day, yes, it does feel like a luxury upgrade, but can also help you through the buys in order to achieve 19 on field, which it's not so much a luxury if you're also getting a premium that you value more than those players out of the buy. So can be creative in that sense.
And then the last one is Sicily or Sarong, which is, I guess, a little bit different because they're on different buys. So, the boilerplate warning is look at your buys. If one works more than the other, then that's probably where I'd lean. They're both good options. But assuming that they're fine magically for both these buys, Sicily, Sarong, have you got a preference? If I get Sicily, I can also get Green, Steel, or Brayshaw. Yet if I get Sarong, I can only get Steel. So it actually sounds more like, do you want Sicily plus one of Green, Steel, or Brayshaw? Or do you want Sarong and Steel?
I'd rather have the flexibility to be able to pick and choose between the other ones. And I actually like this is one where the price difference does matter, I think. And I think that Sicily I think he's a top 6 defender. Yes, his role is a bit more versatile. Yes, he can jump up and down a bit, but he's good enough to be a top 6 defender. Sarong's probably a top 8 mid, but he's only done it for half a season so far. And we're putting a lot of faith in him that he's going to be able to keep this up for the rest of the season. I'm a Freo supporter, and he's playing out of his skin. It's like they're playing like Batman and Batman, but if Brayshaw continues to go the way that he is and the way that he continues to perform, then there's going to be a knockdown in strong scoring eventually. So yeah, I'd go Sicily and the other premium options that you can pick from.
Okay, great. And then I think that's all the questions. So we're going to finish with one final one from me. I'm starting to figure out after the round 12 buy, who are the mid premiums I can target? Because they all seem to be really discounted and nice coming off that buy. So can you please rank for me? Sarong, Brayshaw, Steele, Neil. I think that's the 4. I don't think there's a 5th, right?
Format? AF or
I think my AF's pretty scuffed, but let's go both. Because I think that probably does change it a bit. So yeah.
I think it really does change it a lot. I think in SC I would order Steele first, and then I'd probably go Neil, Brayshaw, Sarong.
Wow, high on Neil. All right, talk about why Neil. You think he's bottomed out? You think his form's going to turn?
I think he's bottomed out, and I think the other thing is that Brisbane's run opens up a little bit. I think they're starting to find their footing as a midfield mix a lot better. Like if you look at the averages of Ashcroft, Neil, and Dunkley over the last, I think it's 3 or 4 weeks, and compare that to the first 6 weeks of the season, they're all like plus 20 on their scores and on their averages, which is a lot. And if that continues to gel and they continue to mesh better, like that's a good sign for someone like Neil. So Neil is someone that I'm very much looking at in SuperCoach, and obviously he's always been a much more friendlier pick in SuperCoach than in fantasy. I think in fantasy, it's actually Brayshaw first, because he has shown the ability to go at a 125, 130 cadence for 6 or 7 weeks. I'd probably have Steele second, Sarong third, and Neil fourth there.
And just the low kind of placement on Sarong in both. Is it just because the value isn't there as much as it is with the others? Because I think the scoring's probably still right up there with the best of them, right? It's just the price.
Yeah, it's the price. And I also think it's about where you're positioned as well. Like if you're trying to make a run for the top 50 or top 100 in a particular format, chances are most of those top teams already have Sarong, especially in AFL Fantasy. He's a very popular pick and he's very highly owned there. If you're trying to make separation away from the pack, avoiding Sarong and betting on him to be a poorer performer and trying to go for one of the others instead could be a good way to make up ground quickly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining and sharing your knowledge, MiniMonk, in a week that I'm sure is stressful for many. Hopefully this gives them a little bit of relief and a little bit of guidance before the weekend comes. And it does mean that if for whatever reason your trades go wrong, your week falls to absolute shit, you can abuse you instead of me on Twitter, where they can find you with what handle?
At MiniMonk10.
And where else can they listen to your dulcet tones?
So I'm on the Coaches Panel podcast. We typically drop a podcast a week on a Wednesday night or Thursday night, depending on when our availability is. But yeah, you can hear my dulcet tones there.
Thank you so much for joining me and spending the hour after I promised it would be like 20 or 30.
So good. Cheers for having me on.